there's a whole list of things that are supposed to be inside of cells. When cells burst open, their contents cause innate immune responses. So chromosomal DNA, intact mitochondria, ATP, NAD, all of these things will kick off an innate immune response.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am very excited to have a leader, an expert in the field of a very, very hot topic, a topic that I get asked about regularly regarding different supplements. We have Dr. Charles Brenner, who is arguably the leading researcher in the world on the topic of NAD metabolism. He discovered the vitamin activity of NR, nicotinamide, actually, I'll let him pronounce it. Riboside, I forget how to pronounce it. We'll let him pronounce it in a minute. 20 years ago when he was on the faculty of Dartmouth College. Since then, he serves as the Roy J. Carver Chair and head of the biochemistry department at the University of Iowa. He moved to Los Angeles in 2000 to become the inaugural Alfred E. Mann Family Foundation Chair of a new department of Diabetes and Cancer Metabolism at City of Hope. He has been internationally recognized for his research and contributions to education, and he enjoys interacting with and educating the public about metabolism and healthy living. Dr. Brenner, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Well, yeah, this is certainly, NAD is certainly a really hot topic. I get people asking me about NAD IVs. I get people asking me about NR, which I think I just butchered how to actually say that word. People asking about NMN. So let's start. Let's go back to when you kind of discovered this molecule and your initial research, and tell us a little bit how you started your work and got interested in this.
Okay. Well, maybe we should introduce NAD first. You introduced me, and let's introduce the central catalyst of metabolism, right? So what we're really interested in when we think about life and healthy living is how to maintain homeostasis, right? How to convert our food into biological energy, how to convert our food into you and into me, right? We generate all of our own RNA, DNA, protein, lipid from the food that we eat. We're trying to maintain our skeletal muscle mass and function as we age. And all of those processes depend upon 4 NAD coenzymes. So they depend on NAD+, NADH, NADP+, and NADPH. And they allow us to convert food into ATP, biological energy, which you need in order to have an idea, remember something, flex your muscle, pump your blood. They're required for DNA repair. They're required for all the anabolic processes. When your cells divide, they have to make new lipids and new proteins. All of that stuff requires NAD. And essentially, our work over the years has shown that the NAD system comes under attack in many conditions of metabolic stress and disease processes, and that NR is a vitamin precursor of NAD. It's the largest piece of NAD that can get into cells. We could talk about NMN later. I'm sure your listeners will want to know about that. But NR is the largest piece of NAD that can get into cells. Cells have to rebuild their NAD because they use NAD to repair DNA and to fight inflammation. And so the use case of NR, nicotinamide riboside, is that you're maintaining your NAD coenzymes in order to carry out all of the steps of metabolism and to have a healthy life through all of the numerous conditions of metabolic stress.
Thank you for that definition. That's important for people to know. So we have NAD, and then the ones that people may have heard of, NR, True Niagen is the popular supplement on the market for NR, and then NMN are the 2 precursors to NAD, right?
Not really. The precursors of NAD are tryptophan, in the liver. So the liver can make NAD what's called de novo, meaning from scratch. It can build the nicotinamide base itself through the 8 steps. It's not a very efficient process. You don't really get more NAD by eating more tryptophan. Is that anticipating your very next question? The 3 vitamin precursors of NAD are nicotinamide and nicotinic acid, also known as niacin. Those are the 2 classical forms of vitamin B3. And then the one that we discovered at Dartmouth, NR, nicotinamide riboside. NMN is used as an NAD precursor. It has a phosphate on it. What that means effectively is a chemist has to put the phosphate on, and then you eat the stuff, and then the phosphate comes off, and at best NR is going into cells, but at worst you're getting exposed to endotoxin, which is a common contaminant of NMN. There is probably a safe form of NMN that is proprietary to a particular company in Massachusetts that has, gotten the FDA to disallow supplement sales of NMN in the United States. So anybody that is selling NMN in the United States is selling it in a way that makes it such that their NMN is not inspected. It wasn't subject to a new dietary ingredient notification. We don't know what's in the bottle. In general, there's usually very little NMN in it. In other cases, there is NMN, but there's also endotoxin. So NMN doesn't really make sense as a supplement in the sense that it has to be converted to NR in order to get into cells, and then there's no known safely commercially available source.
That's a great distinction. So let's go back to when you how did you discover this molecule? How did that come about?
Yeah, I didn't set out to do that. I was working on an enzyme, so that the nerdy things that biochemists do, right? Is how does this enzyme work? And the enzyme that I was working on is called glutamine dependent NAD synthetase, and it's a kind of an amazing enzyme. It has 2 active sites. So one of the active sites takes glutamine, which is an amino acid, right, and converts it to glutamate plus ammonia. And believe it or not, it's the ammonia part that is interesting for the NAD synthesis, because it's using an NAD precursor called NAAD to convert NAAD into NAD, right? And it requires this nitrogen, it requires this amino group. So this particular enzyme has an active site that works on glutamine, forming the ammonia, and has another active site that has to bind the NAAD precursor and get the ammonia group on there somehow in a process that also requires ATP. I mean, it's a fascinating enzyme. And so while in the course of figuring out how those 2 enzyme active sites talk to each other, I actually asked a broader question, which is, do we really understand how NAD is made in something as simple as a yeast cell? And when I looked at there's kind of like a wiring diagram, it's like a cartoon of how NAD is made. And it shows tryptophan coming in from the left, and it shows this nicotinamide pathway, and it shows nicotinic acid going through a particular enzyme. And there are some gene and enzyme assignments that are made in that cartoon. When I looked at that what I call received wisdom, I thought, we haven't really tested that to the degree that I need, confirmation and validation. And in the course of doing those experiments, I found that while those genes and enzymes were properly assigned, there was another whole pathway. There was another precursor, NR, that wasn't predicted to be useful in yeast or in human cells. And we found that NR could bypass all known routes to NAD. That, you can basically block the ability of tryptophan, nicotinamide, or nicotinic acid to function as NAD precursors by knocking out the gene for glutamine-dependent NAD synthetase, and NR would still function. And this set of experiments allowed us to discover the vitamin activity of NR and the existence of the NR kinase genes. And so it turns out there's one NR kinase gene in yeast. And then when you get into mammals, including mice and humans, there's two NR kinase genes. There's one that is expressed in all of our cells, and there's one that is expressed in skeletal and cardiac muscle. And that's a really interesting gene because that one gets turned up very highly when cells are damaged. So when in a failing heart, nicotinamide riboside kinase 2 gets very highly upregulated. But all of this was made possible by just asking questions, saying, do we really understand how NAD is formed? Are those the right genes? And are those the only enzymatic processes that those genes can encode? And is there any other pathway? And, it turned out there was another pathway.
Really interesting stuff. Might be over the head of many of the listeners. So maybe we'll try to simplify. That was the background. That was how you discovered it. We needed to hear about the biochemistry there. But maybe in kind of more layman's terms, in regards to, so then you discovered that, and then how did you discover, or eventually people wanted to, I guess, I don't know if it's license your work or use your work to say, hey, there's huge benefits here for people, and then kind of study it from that perspective.
That's right. So 2004, when we had this publication, I went into the tech transfer office at Dartmouth, knowing that there are two forms of vitamin B3 already, right? But this is a new pathway, newly discovered pathway, and so we sat down and we wrote what they called prophetic claims, and the prophetic claims were that there might be diseases and conditions in which the NAD system gets challenged, in which you would get benefit from supplementing with NR, going through this NR kinase pathway. And that, I hate to say this because it sounds sort of snotty, but those claims turned out to be, in fact, prophetic. That, as I just said, in years later, we and others found that in the failing heart, and this is not only true in mice, this is true in human, the nicotinamide riboside kinase pathway is strongly upregulated to the point it is the most highly overexpressed gene in heart failure. Like I got a call from Paris, about almost 10 years ago from, a guy named Matthias Merrixe, and he said, tell me, what is nicotinamide riboside kinase 2, and why is it the most highly induced gene in the failing heart? Which was a fascinating, inquiry. And so it turns out that with the claims that we made, that nicotinamide riboside, by virtue of having a unique biosynthetic pathway to NAD, might have some unique uses and value cases. And so we, at one time had two issued patents, one for NR as a food/supplement, the other as a drug candidate. And on the basis of that intellectual property, Chromadex, a company based out here in Southern California, licensed the IP, developed some of their own IP, and Grace Corporation developed some other IP on manufacturing and crystallization of NR chloride. And that allowed the development of not only the first commercial NR, but really the entire NAD boosting industry, where, the idea is that, we know that there's existing forms of vitamin B3, but by virtue of this NR pathway, there may be added value of NR. And by the way, NMN, as I just explained, NMN goes through the NR kinase pathway. We showed that, when you knock out the NR kinase gene, NMN doesn't elevate NAD any longer. So that proves that, that the cells that are making use of NMN are making use of it as NR. That's perfectly well established. And so the entire NAD, boosting industry of, using NR or using NMN, or now, as you alluded to, people that are taking intravenous NAD, that NAD is also not available to cells unless it's broken down to compounds without phosphates. Compounds with phosphates just don't get into cells, right? That's why the mRNA, vaccines are in a lipid nanoparticle, right? And that because otherwise the RNA would just be, degraded to nucleosides. It wouldn't be RNA any longer, because RNA has a phosphate in the backbone. And cancer drugs that are active as nucleotides and antiviral drugs that are active as nucleotides are delivered as nucleosides. Again, I know I'm getting into inside baseball and maybe too much biochemistry for some of your podcast viewers, but the key point is, if it has a phosphate, on it, it's excluded from cells. Just something that people will relate to is glucose metabolism, right? Mm-hmm. Our bodies circulate 5 millimolar glucose, right? Mm-hmm. First thing that happens to glucose when it goes into a cell is it gets phosphorylated. It becomes glucose 6-phosphate. Once it's glucose 6-phosphate, it can't get out of the cells, right? So the commodity stuff that is circulating is glucose. It goes into cells. There's what's called a hexokinase or a glucokinase that puts a phosphate on it. Same thing with NR. NR is the biggest piece of NAD that can get into cells. As soon as it gets into cells, nicotinamide riboside kinase puts a phosphate on it, becomes NMN. It's trapped into the cells, and it's committed for synthesis of NAD. If you orally take NR, or you orally take NMN, or you orally or intravenously take NAD, it's got to break down into something without a phosphate. Then cells can take it up as NR, and they can make their NAD. So in fact, when people do an intravenous NAD and they report the painful inflammatory experience that they're having a painful inflammatory experience precisely because their body thinks there must be some lytic process. Lytic means cells breaking open. that is releasing intracellular metabolites like NAD and ATP that is giving them this fiery burning sensation. That fiery burning sensation subsides when the NAD is broken down to NR, the ATP is broken down to adenosine, and those nucleosides, compounds without phosphates, are able to get into cells and do their work. So you're not bypassing any. So anybody that tells you that NMN is closer to NAD is an obfuscator. Okay, it's sort of like, yeah, it's closer to NAD inside of cells, but it's not closer to NAD as a supplement. It's further away from NAD as a supplement because it has to go NMN to NR, then be taken up by cells, and then NR to NMN to NAD again. So, this is something that unfortunately bears repeating because, somebody put into a book that they take a gram of NMN every day, and then hundreds of thousands or millions of people ask that person, how do I get that NMN and what brand do you recommend? And that person's company literally wrote to the FDA and said, supplement NMN needs to be taken off the market because we're developing this as a drug, right? And so then at that point, you have ethical supplement companies and then don't give a F supplement companies, right? As you know. Yeah. And the companies that don't really care about regulatory oversight are going to keep on selling, right? And then there's no way of knowing what's in the bottle. What was in the bottle didn't really make sense anyway because it has to be broken down to NR. But now it makes even less sense because you're in the furthest, wildest of west of the supplement industry with companies that are selling a supplement without a new dietary ingredient indication and have a very high probability of having endotoxin contamination based upon what we know about NMN manufacturing.
That's a really, really good breakdown there. So, yeah, I do want to ask you a little bit more. Well, first, I do want to hear about your studies, right? What are some of the benefits? People are probably wondering, okay, so I know NR is often marketed as anti-aging. NMN and NR people have said, oh, it for older people who have lower NAD levels, it really increases your energy, things of that nature. So would love to hear about what the clinical studies or trials that you did that were done on it said.
Yeah. I think that part of the reason why, people say it increases your energy is that there's no agreed upon definition of what that is. So I'd rather tell you that there are 7, randomized clinical studies that showed anti-inflammatory effects that were quantifiable, right? There are 7 repeated clinical studies that showed anti-inflammatory effects of oral NR as a single agent.
That's great.
Okay. And some of the studies are predicated on things that would be incredibly hard to demonstrate in a short-term trial. There was a study. 2 of the studies I was on in my role of doing quantitative metabolomics, right? But I wasn't involved early enough to say, hey, let's make the primary endpoint achievable, right? Because we now know that, in a 26-week study with a GLP-1 receptor agonist, you can demonstrate weight loss, right? But in a 13-week study of 60 70-year-old men, that are not very physically active and have unhealthy lifestyles, a supplement is not going to cause them to lose weight or to have increased insulin sensitivity, right? Supplements aren't magic, right?
Right.
GLP-1s get people to eat less food, right? So they lose weight. And, vitamins are things that can help support metabolism in conditions of imbalance, right? So, but there was a study where people looked at like potential increase in grip strength in like a 2 or 3 week study with older men. You're not going to increase your grip strength unless you exercise.
Right.
Let's be honest, right? But so primary endpoint wasn't met, and then they said, well, let's look at some other secondary things, and they measure IL-6, IL-10, and a bunch of these other inflammatory markers, and NR was just astonishingly effective at promoting anti-inflammation to the point that you could even see the signal. It was a crossover study. And so, which means that you have a group of, let's say, 10 or 20 men that are going to get NR for 3 weeks and then placebo. Okay. And then 10 or 20 men that are going to get placebo and then NR. Right. So after placebo, the IL-6 and IL-10 are really high. Why? Because men are walking around with chronic inflammation, right? Then when they crossed over to NR, their IL-6 and IL-10 levels were pushed down by like 3/4.
Wow.
Okay, I mean, a very significant amount, very large effect sizes. The amazing thing is the group that got NR first had low IL-6 and IL-10 levels after the first observation, which was 3 weeks, and still had somewhat lower IL-6 and IL-10 levels after 3 weeks of washout. I mean, it was remarkable. And there have been 6 additional studies that have shown that effect. There are also small studies that have shown improved cerebral blood flow in Parkinson's. There are people then there's the swear by kind of anecdotal stuff. Swearing by improved exercise, recovery, workout recovery. Professional football players that have like absolute brutal contact on a Sunday and then have hours of workout on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to prepare for another Sunday game, right? Where the trainers and the players swear by, nicotinamide riboside at like a gram dose, in combination with 3 other over-the-counter, molecules, and our accelerated time to recovery from COVID. We actually anticipated that work because we showed that in a coronavirus infection that there's an attack on the NAD system. There's 5 different enzymes that consume NAD that get, jacked up when cells see double-stranded RNA. Double-stranded RNA is seen by the innate immune system as an kind of like invading force. And it activates these enzymes called PARPs. And PARPs just churn NAD. So that if you give cells higher NAD status, they are able to resist coronavirus replication. And so that, encouraged people to do the randomized human clinical studies. And so now some of that work is being done with long COVID. And so the use cases are really repair and resiliency. And anti-aging is not a word that I love because I don't know how to measure it. I don't believe in the age kits I don't think that those have value to consumers. They're research tools at best. They largely disagree with each other. And there's a huge amount of cherry picking. Like you'll see a study where they'll use 5 different age tests, and then they'll choose the ones that are consistent with their priors. Like if they want to say that something accelerated aging, then they'll choose the ones that gave a higher number on the age test score. So
Right.
to me, it
Right.
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of made up markers there. I know there's one blood testing service that comes up with a number for you, and they're super concerned about cholesterol, so you get a super bad mark if you're a little high on cholesterol. Another company, no, they don't care so much about the cholesterol number, in terms of their age score. So so there's different. It's kind of just made up markers and how people are deciding that.
And we all know the value of exercise, right?
Right.
But and there is exercise-associated inflammation. So IL-6 will go up after you work out. So then there's companies that do blood biomarkers that say, oh, you can't exercise if you're going to take our age test, because we're selling you supplements, to like juice your age test scores, but your exercise is going to make it look worse, because essentially they're measuring IL-6 and they can't distinguish between chronic inflammation in conditions that are debilitary versus the fact that you're working out and there's a little bit of stress to your muscle system. So
yeah, I've made that distinction myself. I learned not to do a really hard workout the day before a blood test, kind of for that reason. But of course, we do know exercise is good for you. But I think the point of lowering inflammation in the body, that's the key thing we always hit on this podcast about. Really, in my opinion, it's one of the most important aspects of health is lowering inflammation. We know every major disease stems from inflammation, right? Lots of, so anything that can lower inflammation is really the holy grail. So if these studies are showing that it lowers inflammation, I mean, people always ask me, oh, I'm taking turmeric or fish oil for inflammation. And I think, those may be good. They may work for some people. But really, when you can lower inflammation and your recovery time and all that kind of thing, that really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I do want to also ask you about, because NAD IVs, we touched on them. And I remember a couple of years ago, so NR is what really popularized this whole NAD movement, like you said. And then a couple of years ago, it was just the super hot topic, NAD IVs. Oh, now we can just mainline it straight into your, straight into your body. We don't even need it's more effective. You can get way more, increase your NAD levels. And I was like, oh man, this sounds, not knowing much better about it. I said, okay, sounds great. I did it. And I'm like, oh, I'll go. It takes an hour. I'll mess around on my phone. I literally could not do anything. I could not look at my phone. I was dizzy. I was lightheaded. I felt super weird. I never did it again after that one time. It was the weirdest thing. And I thought, this isn't right. I didn't feel benefits after. Some people, I don't know if it's placebo, and this is why you have to do placebo-controlled trials, right? Before there were...
Thank you.
Before there were placebo-controlled trials, every drug passed the test, right? Essentially.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that a lot of the people that swear by it are, in the addiction recovery industry or something like this, and so think about the whole, zeitgeist here. So someone is almost by definition, hit rock bottom when they're ready to make a change in their life and has to scrape up, thousands of dollars for the treatment, and then has a very caring care team, right? And then the IV treatment itself sounds kind of traumatic in terms of how, you feel during this. And then you come out the other side, not using drugs and having experienced this. And so I think it's a very mixed effect, experience for people.
Yeah.
But
do you think it's dangerous, though? Do you think people...
I think it's dangerous, again, in the sense that it's not well regulated. I don't know what they're putting in the bag. It doesn't make sense because the NAD has to break down to NR. They're getting an inflammatory reaction from the fact that NAD and I mean, there's no ATP in the bag, but NAD is something that kicks off an innate immune response. So there's a whole list of things that are supposed to be inside of cells. When cells burst open, their contents cause innate immune responses. So, chromosomal DNA, intact mitochondria, ATP, NAD, all of these things will kick off an innate immune response. And so that's why it feels the way it feels. And, a person is taking, sort of like a year's Niagen budget and putting it into their arm on one afternoon. And, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It is extremely expensive. I've seen costs anywhere from $500 to $1,000 per session for one session, which I was like, well, then it must make me feel amazing. No, it made me feel awful. So yeah, I certainly won't be doing that again. I think the hype and craze has kind of died down a little bit on that since it first came out, which I think is a good thing. So yeah, so these are really good. These are really good things. Are there any other molecules that you have studied in your career that you have found to be as effective in terms of lowering inflammation as NR?
Well, like I say, I didn't set out to, to discover a vitamin or, even to solve inflammation. But it is kind of unique in the sense that there's a lot of people in molecular biology that, are doing some work on an enzyme in yeast, and they claim that by doing this work, they're going to identify a drug target that someday will help, human people. We were just working on an enzyme in yeast, and we did discover, a compound that I think is having an impact in human health. I mean, there's at least 80 registered clinical trials of nicotinamide riboside in all kinds of interesting diseases and conditions of metabolic stress. And so, we just want people to stay honest and put safety first. And safety first means that, there's not a known safe form of NMN. There is a safe form of NR. When you are, buying from a company that, that worked with the scientists to develop a safe supplement, that should give people, the margin of safety that they need. So that's just what I would like to emphasize. And, I think that when people overpromise and they say that they've experienced age reversal, or that, you also have to buy this, kit for age, or they're pushing, things that are fully debunked, like resveratrol, then, that you're not listening to a trusted source.
Interesting. So resveratrol has been debunked?
It's been debunked for decades.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
still a pretty popular, it's still a very popular supplement, resveratrol.
It literally makes no sense whatsoever. It's not orally bioavailable to humans. It was reported to be a SIRT1, activator. It's not. Pterostilbene, which is more bioavailable than resveratrol, is also not a SIRT1 activator, and increases low density lipoprotein cholesterol in humans in a dose and time dependent fashion. So, the whole resveratrol thing has been fully debunked and has been so for a very long time. It's really a stain on the scientific literature.
Wow, that's really good to know. I did want to ask you, so True Niagen is the company, right? Niagen, True Niagen, many people may have seen them. Obviously, you can find them online, Amazon, everywhere else. True Niagen is the company that worked directly with you, kind of licensed your work.
So, Chromonix is the company.
Yeah.
Niagen is the licensed ingredient. True Niagen is the actually brand in a blue bottle.
Yeah.
There's a couple of other products that have Niagen in them. There's like a face cream that we made in a Korean company called Juvenis that has a brand called NR Lab, and a brand called IU Cell that has real Niagen in it. But yeah, the brand is True Niagen, and the company is called Chromadex.
And I noticed what's interesting, though, I was going to ask you this. I noticed in the beginning, you were the only type of NR. Niagen was really the only NR on the market. But recently, I've seen a bunch of other supplement companies popping up with NR supplements.
Yeah, they kind of cracked our. They went to war against our intellectual property. Some of these companies are still infringing on one thing or another. But yeah, that's outside of my control, and I don't have any data on the safety of those stuff.
Right. So the studies have been on the one,
almost all of the clinical literature and the quality animal preclinical literature has been done with material sourced from Chromadex. So Chromadex has what they call the SERP program. It's like the Chromadex External Research Program, and like 200 groups from around the world have requested material like authentic Niagen from Chromadex to put into mice and rats and worms and people. And so that's actually really a backbone of the trusted science. Whereas in NMN, again, people, even on the research side, are getting it from places where it's very likely to be endotoxin contaminated. There's a preprint out there on NMN that showed renal toxicity, so kidney toxicity. I wouldn't expect pure NR or pure NMN to do that. I would absolutely expect NMN contaminated with endotoxin to do that. The kidney would be the first organ that would experience toxicity if you had low level endotoxin. So it is pretty important for people to look at the source. And of course, disclosure. I'm the chief scientific advisor of Chromadex.
Yeah. I mean, it was based on your research, right? So that's great. Well, Dr. Brenner, this has been great. You're a wealth of knowledge. This was really eye-opening, really educational. I think anyone who listened to you here in this episode can really tell about your knowledge. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. And where can people follow you, learn more, buy Niagen?
I'm sure they can find out, see how they could go to trueniagen.com, right? Or Amazon. But my lab, brennerlab.net. My Twitter is @CharlesMBrenner. I'm on some of the other social media platforms as well, but I answer questions, almost every day from people about metabolism, and just try to, keep it real and be honest with people. I mean, the key is to stay active and, don't hang out with people that will steal your lunch money, right?
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Dr. Brenner. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we could do it again sometime soon.
Yes, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, can you please leave us a rating or review and subscribe? I've realized that while we have actually increased our downloads a lot, we're actually getting a lot of downloads, which I'm really happy about. We actually have very few ratings. And I realized that I've never asked people really to rate much. So I'm asking you now if you could please rate and review and subscribe. And if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to anyone that you think will get value out of this. Also, if you haven't checked out our line of products at buypeakperformance.com, you get 20% off your first order. That's www.buypeakperformance.com. We have some incredible products, including our organic high-altitude coffee. If you don't know this, coffee is one of the most heavily sprayed with pesticides out of any crop. So it's really important that you drink organic coffee. We've gone above and beyond to source what we believe is the highest quality and healthiest organic coffee in the world. We're also famous for our organic green superfood powder. You can get 20% off of that as well at buypeakperformance.com. We also have an organic, vegan, and paleo plant protein. See, most of the vegan proteins out there are using brown rice protein, which is really not a good source of protein, and it's also a grain. And if you're paleo, you know that grains tend to cause inflammation in some cases for some people. And so we wanted to make one that was paleo friendly and vegan and organic. We made an amazing amino acid profile, so it's really one of the best plant proteins for muscle building. So you can check out Peak Performance Organic Plant Protein. You can find that on our website. Of course, all our products are on Amazon as well. So thanks again. And again, please, if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to someone who you feel can get value out of it. And please leave us a rating, review, and subscribe. Thank you.